Hey guys, on today's episode, we talk about what it takes to be a GOAT, and we go over a list of the GOATs. But first, let's talk about the Dallas Crystal Cup Open, which happens November 10th. It is the 5th annual one that's happening here. It has a featured division, the Ultimate Grappler Qualifier, which is a man's no-gi advanced absolute. The winner qualifies and advances to compete in Orlando, Florida, where the Ultimate Grappler will be crowned, and a grand prize of $2,500 will be awarded. Early registration is October 21st, and late registration is November 6th, and late registration is the 9th, November 9th. Please go to nucjjf.com to register now. Links below.
They're here.
Welcome to the Hook J Podcast.
Who the fuck is that guy? Who the fuck is that?
When it's all said and done, I know one thing that I can do. I can fight. I can give it, and I can take it.
You should have left me over on that other game that I'm from, that more ruthless game where we bounce heads off the canvas and drill them into the floor. You should have left me where I was.
The show starts now.
On today's show, we talk about the GOAT in MMA, not just combat sports, but MMA specifically. By GOAT, I don't mean the furry little four-legged horned animal that defies gravity, but the greatest of all time. And exactly what it means to be it and how to become it, rather, or what it takes to be considered the greatest. Justin, what does it take?
For me, the GOAT has got to be the person who, for their time and era, is not just the greatest of all time, but really elevates the game on any particular front, whether it be stand-up, whether it be the ground game, or both. Whoever it is has got to be somebody who really pushes the sport forward, and the people around them have got to go up in skill level, strength, quality of character, all that stuff to be better, because MMA is only 25 years old, 30 years old at most, and it's constantly getting better. I don't really like the GOAT argument because it's such a young sport, but
Yeah.
there's always going to be the GOAT argument, so we're going to have the GOAT argument today.
So, what it takes to be considered the GOAT. All right. For me, it's a combination of consistency, right? You got to be consistent in, pushing yourself forward. It's not just about the wins. That helps with the argument in some cases, is the winning. But it's also changing up your style, pushing forward, and not really retreating when it comes to the way you're developing. Like Chuck Liddell at one point, he could have been considered the baddest man on the planet. For the most part, when he was, in the prime of his career, he was, but it quickly fell off. And that's why most people wouldn't put him on, their list. It's because, he fell off. He tried just to do the same thing over and over. It didn't work out for him multiple times, but he kept trying it. But you have other people like GSP who lost, came back, won, developed more, changed up his style, lost again, did the same thing, and he just kept developing himself and pushing forward. So in your opinion, what is your top 3 GOATs? Who are they?
So to start it off with me, I think out of the top 3, my number 3 choice is going to be Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson.
The pound-for-pound king of flyweight.
Not just any flyweight. Not just flyweight at all. It's just, to me, he's always going to be the pound-for-pound because the guy was just so good. So good. I mean, he's got the longest defense streak in history. He has the latest stop in history with 4:59 in the final round against somebody. That's insane. He got a finish. It's like that's the latest stop in UFC history. I mean, the level of talent the guy has is just insane. He's so fast. He's so persistent. He is constantly on you. After a round, you see him go to his corner, he talks to his coach. His coach, okay. okay. He listens. He understands what he's got to do. He goes out there and he breaks down his opponents. I mean, I don't understand why he lost his last fight, metrics wise. I'm a by the numbers kind of guy, but I do understand what the judges saw. I mean, watching it again, I can see what they saw, and I still don't agree with it because out of 10, 3 takedowns don't really mean much. If you tried 10 times, 3 of them, and only one of them you really held the opponent, but it is what it is at this point. I mean, he came out, he started 2007, he's still going right now. I mean, like at this point, he held the belt for so long, being the initial champion, the initial flyweight champion in the UFC, and then holding it all the way up until now. It's just insane to me. And then he has the choice to keep staying in there at the same weight class or go up if he wants to fight. If he wants to keep fighting, push himself a little bit harder, he can go up to 135.
Well, he was there before and he dropped after he lost to Dominic Cruz.
Yeah, once they opened up that division, though, he knew where he needed to be.
So the question is for him now is like, does he stay? Does he move up? Personally, I think he can get that belt back, no problem. So that was your first pick for the GOAT, which I agree with that. That could be on the list of the GOATs of MMA.
Well, there's just no denying the talent level that he brings. Understandably, the flyweight division is lacking in talent. It's not necessarily lacking. I just think he's held the bar so high for so long, and it's just taken the whole division so long to catch up.
Yeah, I think that might be what it is. Because we've seen, well, besides him being dethroned in his last event, we've seen that division slowly get up there. Yeah. So maybe this is a telling tale of like how it's going to go in that division. But I don't even know they're going to keep it. There's been talk for a while that they might, get rid of that division completely.
Well, my thing is they should keep it. I really think they should keep the division. There's no reason to get rid of it. It may not be a draw. You don't want to see a bunch of tiny guys out there fighting, but that also comes from your lack of promotion on the people in it. Like, the bad thing about, as much as I love the UFC, the bad thing that they do is they just do not promote the entire roster. Like, if you ain't in Dana's eye constantly knocking people out and having bloody massacres out there, then
throwing dollies at buses.
Throwing dollies at buses or jumping over the cage and trying to flying kick somebody outside of it, or, just being an all-around
having
character.
Very live matches and setting people on fire.
Yeah, if you're not out there constantly in the mainstream, like the problem with the flyweight division is Demetrius Johnson. He's held up the talent for so long. He's had the belt for so long, and the simple fact that he is such a nice guy in the ring and out of the ring that it's like there's no way to spin anything he does because he's such a good dude.
Yeah, I don't. He doesn't seem like the type of guy that would even like if you cut him off in traffic, he'd be like, "Oh, okay, yeah."
Like, oh man, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah,
just keep going.
It was so passive aggressive, but he seems like a nice dude.
Yeah, like, I think that's the problem. Now, if you had somebody in the flyweight division, let's say Ray Borg, since I know you fought Ray Borg, I know Ray Borg dropped down to 125. If Ray Borg was out there, being a fool the whole time, like Conor does, or like anybody else up in the lightweight division, pretty much everybody over there is acting a fool right now. If Demetrius or Ray Borg was doing that, now the flyweight division would have a lot more talk about it.
Yeah,
I think
for sure. That's no question about it. If there's somebody out there who came in and acted, did his Conor thing, or if he just took a persona from wrestling and decided to do it, a whole like Ric Flair type thing, I guarantee he'd probably own the division.
Exactly. He'd really bring a lot of talk to the flyweight division, and there'd be a lot more movement going on there. But it is what it is at this point. Demetrius' talent level, though, like the explosiveness, how fast he is, and nobody will ever deny the fact that man is so creative. Got the freaking mousetrap. The mousetrap that he pulled on Ray Borg. Who in the hell slams somebody and mid-slam sets up an armbar that way as soon as you hit the ground? Yeah, exactly. There's no other way to really say. Like, even Henry Cejudo had a hard time the second time they fought. Now, the first time they fought, he kneed him into oblivion and then finished him.
It was all about the clinch work. He took a book or a page from Anderson Silva's book and just Muay Thai'd him up the whole time.
Yeah, and then their second fight, even in the second fight, Henry Cejudo had a hard time getting those takedowns and then doing something with those takedowns. And he's an Olympic level wrestler.
He's not just Olympic. He's an Olympic. I think he's a gold
Yeah,
medalist.
he's a gold
isn't he?
medalist.
Or
Yeah,
he was a gold or bronze.
At least a medalist. I know
You know he's
because
a
he lost
medalist,
him in
yeah.
the fire. I know he lost him in the
I
fire.
think it was gold, but I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that one.
Exactly, and he's only lost decisions. The one to Cejudo and the one to Cruz.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the guy is just amazing in the ring, out of the ring. He's somebody you definitely need to follow him on Twitch
Yeah, he's
and
funny
on Twitter.
So that's your first pick in the top 3.
Yeah, he's easily gonna be in my top 3 for
Okay.
all time. No matter what happens going forward in my life, I always think Mighty Mouse is gonna be in the top 3 for me.
Okay, that's fair enough. I can see why. Now, my first pick is going to be a guy who really made me start watching the sport more intently. Before that, I was more of a casual fan. You know, the first time I ever watched UFC was the Ultimate Fighter finale. That was the Forrest Griffin, Stephen Bonner fight.
I think that fight alone got so many fans.
Oh, yeah. I was one of the people they talk about that was like, ran out of the
Watching.
living room. I was like, hey, you got to turn this on. Like, even my uncle called me and was like, hey, you got to check this out. I remember that. Jason called the house and was like, hey, you guys got to look this up. And I was already in there telling Dad about it. Like, we got to watch this. But the guy who really made me start watching it was Dan Henderson. He was the first person that I watched and was like, I want to know everything about this guy, right? And the first fight I ever watched him was his most amazing knockout of all time in UFC against Michael the Count Bisping, where he fucking knocked him into oblivion with no problem.
That is one of the most brutal knockouts that you will ever see. The fact that it looked like Bisping's body was having trouble turning on,
Yeah.
it was just crazy.
You ever hear, like, Michael talk about that?
No, I've never heard what Michael. I've only heard him like mention that it happened. I never
He
heard
was
him
on
talk about
a recent podcast, and
it. His own podcast.
oh yeah, I imagine he probably talked about it on there, but he was on a different one. He was on the Church of What's Happening Now.
Oh
with
yeah.
Joey. And he was talking about it, and he was like, afterwards I was sitting in the ambulance, and I just couldn't remember what was going on. He asked his manager like 5 or 6 times, like, hey, don't I have a fight tonight? He asked Frank Mir a couple times, like, hey, don't I have a fight tonight? And then, like, on the way to the hospital, he's, like, starting to remember stuff. And that was, like, a couple hours later. That was, like, 2 or 3 hours later. So Dan Henderson was the first guy that I watched and was like, I want to know everything about him afterwards, right? And looked up a bunch of fights in Pride. So first fight I ever looked up of him afterwards was him fighting Fedor, which was in Strikeforce.
You fought Fedor Emelianenko?
He fought Fedor, and he knocked him out. He was I think the first guy to actually knock him out, or the second guy.
Wow.
It was right after Fedor lost. Fedor lost to Verdum, then he lost to, I think, Silva, and then Henderson. I think that's the order, or maybe Silva and Henderson were flipped. But that was, so he beat Fedor, right?
That was in Strikeforce.
Yeah, that was in Strikeforce. But prior to that, the amount of people that he's beat that I consider legends are flat out amazing. He's beat Nogueira, right? That was in Pride. He's beat Wanderlei. He's beat Belfort. He beat a ton of people. He had 2-division champ. He was a 2-division champ in Pride before coming over to the UFC, where he got a title shot and then lost it there. But it was flat out amazing, the fact that he was able to take, this background that was in wrestling and transform it. He's more of a pioneer than anything, and I think he could be considered a GOAT because he took a background in wrestling, added a little bit of boxing to it, and heavy-ass right hand, and made a career out of it.
God, that right hand, dude. The H-bomb. Oh,
Yeah.
my goodness.
So just check out the highlights on his... let me go over a couple names, okay? You got Wanderlei, he's fought, beat him. After all, he lost once, beat him. He's beat Renzo Gracie. He's fought Nogueira twice. Fought Wanderlei twice. Vitor Belfort, Anderson Silva, Rampage, Rich Franklin, Michael Bisping, Jake Shields, Fedor, Lyoto, Rashad Evans, Belfort, Cormier, Musasi, Tim Bosch, Belfort, Hector Lombard, Michael Bisping. He's fought a ton of names, and you could consider him a GOAT, in my opinion.
Machida, Evans, God, man, the list just goes on. Anderson Silva, and Quentin Jackson. I mean,
You can consider him a GOAT just looking at his record. You know, it's 32-15, which is a pretty impressive record in MMA, especially after a career.
yeah, it's 2-1 basically.
Yeah, most careers end probably after 7-8 losses. He's got 32-15, which is a fairly good ratio. You know, if that was a KD, it'd be a 0.1 or 1 point something.
My question is, though, in those early days of Pride, like, how much abuse did he take?
That's the great question. But you know, in the early days of Pride, when he was starting out there, it was a lot of decision wins, and then a lot of it was based on just wrestling because he was so good at it. He'd take people down, and then just beat the hell out of them. And then he managed to get some better boxing skills. Then he started really doing it together, putting it together, and that's when that right hand came into effect.
God, that right hand.
So that's my first pick. Like, you really can't. The GOAT's never going to be. It's never going to be an actual GOAT.
No, there'll never be an actual GOAT in any sport.
So these are just the list of like a couple people we can consider up there for the GOAT. So who's your number 2? You know, the second person on your list.
The second person I have a debate on. It's really hard for me to decide because what happens in the ring and outside the ring kind of goes into effect of like who you are and what really affects my judgment on you. And I have to go with Daniel DC Cormier.
Why?
Because it should be John Jones, but John Jones is not the GOAT to me because he's done so much outside of the ring, and he's been popped 2-3 different times now. It really makes you question his entire career. Like, how much of his entire career is legit and how much of it isn't. That's my thing. If you're getting popped for substance abuse and steroids of any type, then I will automatically take you out of the debate unless it is 100% proven every time that you get popped for steroids that it was a tainted supplement, because it does happen. And supplements are meant to help you recover and do all kinds of things. Now, there's some of them that are meant to actually, you know, make it so you're a brick shit house 24/7. You feel no pain. You can walk in there with a broken arm and still fight. That's what some of them do. But some of them are just there to help you recover. All athletes try to find ways to recover more because your body takes a beating. I understand that. But with John, it's different.
So
John got popped.
What you're saying is the actions outside the ring combined with the steroid usage that he got popped with puts everything, it throws his career up in like a limbo type of a situation.
Yes, because you have to debate everything he does now. It's like, wait a minute, were you really that good? Or were you that good because beforehand we weren't really testing for steroids?
I think John, you know, he's got this tremendous in-the-ring IQ. He's got this creative type thing he does, and it's amazing to see his brain work in there. He listens to his coaches, and he can find ways to hit you from different angles. And it's amazing even when he grapples people.
Shoulder strikes. Like, nobody shoulder strikes. John shoulder strikes. The IQ, I get it.
It's amazing to see what he can do in the ring. But because of being popped twice, and the second time apparently was dick pills, right? Is what he was saying?
That was the first time.
The first
dick
time?
pills.
Okay.
The second time was like, oh, it's like a drop of water in a pool. It was so minuscule. It didn't help anything. Then why was it in your system?
Like, just the fact that it's in there just questions his entire career. I think that's a fair debate.
I think if he hadn't had a second instance, then I would have let it go. Because the first time, okay, you got popped, you haven't been popped since, so you cleaned up your act.
Well, the thing
right?
is,
and you're still just as good afterwards. Okay, you've proved it. But now I have this moment where I'm having to second guess my decision because you get popped again. That's the second time. It's like whenever your kid does something, you're like, why'd you do that? I just told you not to do that. And then you have this other outside the ring shenanigans that you pull. It's like, dude, come on, man.
Well,
it's really hard to vouch for you when you're being just a piece of shit.
it's hard to defend a guy okay, who, when he got popped the second time for steroids, that was the third time he violated USADA. The first time, a lot of people forget, is he got popped for cocaine. He had
But
cocaine in his
cocaine
system.
wasn't a substance.
But it's an illegal substance, regardless of where
yeah.
you're at.
No, I get it.
If a cop pulled him over and he had that, he would be taken to jail.
Yes, I understand.
So a lot of people forget that. So that right there, the first time I read that, the first time I saw that, I was like, okay, this kind of tells you what kind of a person he is outside of the ring. Because at the time, they were still like, oh, he's John Jones. He's the guy who, goes to church. They portrayed him as the good guy the entire time they promoted him.
The good guy that does coke and runs into pregnant women and runs off.
Then he did that. Then that happened. Then he got popped for that, and then he got the hit and run, and he comes back, and he goes into the whole steroid thing, and then he gets suspended. It's a whole ordeal from there. So it just kind of been falling downhill. But since that first, violation that he had, I've always been kind of iffy on John because of that.
Exactly.
Not just because of the drug use, right? But the fact that he is a public figure in a sport that people look up to. At one point in time, the heavyweight champ in boxing wasn't it was idolized by people. And the same thing is kind of happening in MMA.
Right. It's starting to transition that way, yeah.
Yes, because boxing's phasing out. So the same thing started happening in MMA. So, people are putting that out there. These are people to look up to. And to have someone like that, and it's kind of iffy. So I would side with DC more than John Jones in the number 2 slot.
And that's why I'm going with it. Just because quality of character is a big factor in deciding the GOAT. It's just a big factor in deciding the GOAT, because Michael Jordan is not the GOAT because he just played ball well. It's everything he did outside too. He built his team around him. He helped them advance their careers. He made them better. And all the charity work outside and all the work with kids and everything he's done for the sport as a whole, and just all sports really, because he is one of the biggest stars ever in the history of any type of sport. He's one of the biggest stars. And if you're going to be a GOAT, if you're going to be considered a GOAT, if you're going to be talked about as a GOAT, you have to elevate the sport. You just have to. And DC, if you just put it down on paper, he's only lost one time. John Jones.
He's only lost to John Jones, but because of John's action, it throws it up in debate whether he was on something, even though he didn't get popped then. But immediately after that, he had the hit and run and everything, so he gets the title shot. But because of his actions recently, where after the second fight with John gets popped, after the comeback John has, where he has the title, the day of the fight, or the day before the fight, he gets popped or something, it puts the first fight with John up for debate.
And then, in the rematch, DC gets head kicked into oblivion, and it's a legitimate knockout from John Jones, only to have it overturned to a no contest because he got popped. So,
well, here's the thing. Here's the thing a lot of people forget about that second fight, is that DC was beating John Jones all the way up to that head kick. In my opinion, DC was doing really well up to that point where he got head kicked.
Points-wise, I don't think he was beating him, but he was putting a pressure on Jones, who he was constantly pushing forward. He was shrugging off everything. He was constantly in the pocket, and he was hitting Jones pretty damn hard, too. He was laying him into him. I don't think he was up on the scorecard, but I do definitely think he was putting John Jones in a position to really, he needed that head kick.
John had to dig deep and figure that out, because the pressure DC was putting on him, and he was throwing John off his game, which is
exactly.
is the first time that's happened in the octagon. A lot of people forget when you watch that, because people are John Jones fanboys. They're like, "Oh my God, he's good in the octagon." You can't deny that. But
he's been pushed
DC
before.
was really fucking him up. Alexander Gustafsson, when he fought him, was really fucking him up, and that went to decision. And you can argue.
I honestly think Gustafsson won that fight, but that's a different debate for a different day. DC in that fight, I think he was losing. I really do think he was losing. But he was putting a pressure on Jones. Jones hadn't fought or hadn't felt in a long time. He was definitely starting to have to. John Jones needed that head kick to land, and so he was setting it up all fight, and he finally got it to land. And after that, it took him another 30 seconds to actually close it out because DC was, he was trying to fight back, and it took John Jones a lot more effort than I thought it was going to take to close that last part out, but it happened. But the reason DC is the better quality fighter overall is just because there's no debating him. There just really isn't. His level of talent is through the roof. He's undefeated in the heavyweight division. Outside the ring, he's a good dude. He helps people all the time, and especially with wrestling, he's constantly pushing people around him to be better. Other than the John Jones thing, if that wasn't on his record, then he'd be undefeated.
Yeah.
The one John Jones lost and the other one that got overruled to a no contest. So, as much as I think John Jones is the legit number 2 spot for me, I can't put him on the list because I can't really back up his career now. It's like only thing I can really say that he has done that hasn't been in question is whatever fight he's got coming up. Because everything else before that, I'm like, okay, well, maybe you just got away with it because you got popped twice.
Even then, we don't know. We don't know how he's going to act up to the fight, right? We won't be positive for sure that he's not on anything, that he's playing fair until maybe a week or so afterwards when all the tests are done, because you take the drug test before the fight and then take one after the fight. So hopefully he won't have anything in his system this time that, even though it's a salt in the water, but
I mean, if John goes out there and fights Gustafsson, because that's what they're talking about being set up for December.
I think it is set up.
If that fight happens and John Jones goes out there for 5 rounds, beats Gustafsson up, gets a decision win again, I'm not going to consider it a real win for about 2 weeks until USADA has actually come out and said something.
Yeah.
Which they won't even do now, apparently. Well,
Really?
Yeah. Apparently they're going to let the fighters say it and they won't jump to conclusions. DC, he's undefeated, other than the one Jones loss. And he's been with the UFC for, 8-9 fights now since, 2013. And the level of talent I honestly think he brings to the ring, inside, outside, and his commentating is really good, too.
Yeah.
Let's just throw that in there. His commentating is really, really good.
Well, I consider DC one of the GOATs because prior to MMA, he was on the Olympic team. I don't think he medaled. I think he was just on it. And then he goes to Strikeforce because he was like, I'm done with wrestling. Went to Strikeforce, never lost, became the heavyweight champ there.
Hey, he wasn't even supposed to fight in Strikeforce, if I remember that right. He was a coach for somebody.
He was coach for Cain.
Yeah.
Cain Velasquez.
And they needed somebody to step in because somebody jumped in. He's like, I'll do it.
Yeah. And he opts in. He does it, becomes the champ. He goes over to the UFC, has this ride through the heavyweight division. Cain becomes champ. He's like, all right, can't do it anymore because he's my teammate, he's my buddy. Drops down, runs through everybody, gets to John Jones, loses, gets an immediate title shot because he's number 1 or so. I think he was number 2 in the rankings or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. Goes against Rumble, gets the title, and it's, lost to John, win it back, and then wins the heavyweight title. Which, that's an amazing career. If you were let's tell a story, if it was transformed into a movie, that'd be an amazing movie.
Oh, yeah. Since my number 2 spot's a debate on who it is, which I'm pretty firmly going to stand on DC just because of John's antics, who is your number 2?
El Guapo himself. Bas Rutten.
Yeah, Bas El Guapo Rutten.
He's one of my favorite fighters of all time. He's a guy that I discovered right around the whole Dan Anderson thing, and I was like, I want to know everything that's happened in MMA ever. So that was a lot of trying to find Pride tapes and Pancrase tapes and all this shit online, and just bootleg stuff because that's how we do it. But Bas was one of the guys that I was like, I want to know everything about him, and he's got a pretty interesting story. He was a kickboxer, and then he went over to Pancrase and started fighting there. He loses to a submission, And he's like, well, I've learned a little bit of ground game. Loses to Shamrock, Ken Shamrock. It's like, okay, I learned a little bit more. He's kind of learning his catch wrestling, and it's not really working out quite as well. And he literally teaches himself grappling, right? He knows a couple people that show him a few things, but he essentially teaches himself grappling, which is amazing because he got really fucking good at it, especially in Pancrase. That's a catch wrestling type of ground game that was there. So in order to learn that type of wrestling, where you're like, I have to put somebody down on the mat, keep them there, and then put some sort of submission into it, opposed to today where it's like, I'm going for a submission and then I'll try to keep them there. If you're, the UFC, all that, generally that's what it's supposed to be, or I want to put him down, then try to do it. But, Boss, so he loses to Ken Shamrock, and he's like, I don't give a damn, this is not happening again. And he goes on a 22
win streak after
22 win streak. He revenges his losses to the Shamrock brothers, which was amazing. He broke a dude's liver at one point. It's just amazing what he's done.
To be clear about the revenge or the avenge to the Shamrock brothers, like Ken Shamrock beat him twice, so he took it out on Frank Shamrock twice.
Well, Frank beat him once, in all fairness. So he beats, he learns how to grapple. He becomes this legend in Japan, essentially. And the UFC is like, we want you to fight for us. We want you to be in it. So he's like, okay. He fights once, and they're like, one more time, we'll do this against Kevin Randleman. And he beats Kevin Randleman, which you can argue was an interesting decision between the two. A lot of people felt that Boss didn't win it. A lot of people thought Kevin won it. A lot of people thought Kevin lost. It's a toss-up. But he becomes essentially the first UFC heavyweight champ. Because that was the first time they were like, we're actually doing titles. It wasn't just like, oh, you won the tournament.
Yeah.
And then he goes from this amazing career where afterwards his body is broken. If you talk to him now or you listen to interviews, he's in pain most of the time, doesn't have any cartilage in his knees. He has to have neck surgery all the time, and just his body's broken. And he goes over to Pride and becomes the voice of Pride. Him with Mauro Ranallo, he becomes the voice of Pride, which a lot of people still think that's one of the greatest type of leagues urban professional fighting ever had.
Pride?
Because just the amount of shows they put on, the quality of the shows, and the fact they were like, well, we'll just do it. And put Bob Sapp versus Nagaro on there. A big-ass dude versus a smaller dude. And he almost killed him in that fight. But he becomes this legend of MMA, right? You can't deny Boss is one of the guys that you want to hear.
I tell you right now, I want to learn how to palm strike people.
Yeah, that's for sure. So he becomes this legend, and he's the commentator for Pride. He has this legendary career. He becomes a commentator on one of the most critically acclaimed MMA shows of all time, Inside MMA. He becomes an analyst. He's transcended the own sport to become somebody that people gravitate towards just to hear him talk about the sport that he came out of. Which I think you consider him a GOAT, just the fact that people are like, even though he's not in it anymore, I still want to know what he's got to say. And on top of that, the people he's trained has not only became these great fighters, but have helped other people become great fighters.
Dwayne Ludwig.
TJ
Dillashaw.
Trains TJ Dillashaw, which is kind of a trickle-down effect.
I think he trains Alistair Overeem too right now. Boss does.
I think so. It would make sense.
They're both Dutch.
Yeah. So that would be my number 2 pick. I think that's a fair thing for me. He's a guy that, made me want to watch the sport more. So who's the number 3? Who's the 3 on yours?
The number one person, I think, when it comes to MMA GOAT, and because I'm going to consider him my number 1 because where he falls in the timeline of MMA, he comes around about the midway point. Let's say it's 25 years MMA's been around, really. He's about the 12-year mark before he really made an impact. And that's enough that he's pushed past all the early pioneers and he set a new standard. And then for everybody who comes after him, everybody's like, okay, we got to at least be at that level to do anything. And that's George St. Pierre. GSP.
That's my number 3. I completely agree with you.
Number 1.
Number 1. What's my third pick? Like we're doing a list. It's number 3 on my thing.
So our number 1 pick, and I don't think it's going to be a really shadow of a doubt at this point in history for most people, is going to be George Rush St. Pierre.
Yeah, I agree.
The level of talent. Let's just talk about the level of talent. Okay, the guy is just. Whenever he fought, if you ever got to see him fight, at the time it was on a whole nother level. People just weren't prepared for the technique and the skill that he actually brought to the wrestling and the ground game that he had, and just if people like Khabib now, GSP was Khabib before. They just take you down, grind you out, beat you to living death, and make you go the distance every single time.
The interesting thing about GSP is he wasn't there to put on a show. He was there to win, right? Which is something a lot of people, everybody who watches the sport at first are like, I just want to see the knockouts. I want to see a dude punch a dude's head into oblivion.
Which is fine. I mean, that's what got me into it.
But at some point, you gotta realize as a fighter, you don't want to do that all the time, and that's something that GSP recognized almost instantly.
Early on, yeah.
And he became a fighter who's there to win. A lot of people are like, oh, he goes to decision a lot, but he does it in a way that you kind of agree with it. Like, I'm not going to go in there and try to get my head kicked in from a guy who's going to try to kick my head in. I'm going to go in there, I'm going to take it down and try to win like that. If I have the opportunity to knock you out, I'm going to try. I'm not going to lie. But I'm going to try to win, opposed to try to, give myself brain damage. Look at his career. It's amazing. He's only got, 4 losses? Or 3?
2.
2?
2 losses.
Okay, he's only got 2 losses.
Matt
Hughes and Matt Serra, right?
Matt Serra. I guess Matt's not his name to fight.
Well, we know what we should name our kid. If you ever have a kid, name him Matt something.
Especially if you think he's going to go up against George Rush St. Pierre.
Like, you imagine grooming a kid from birth. Your name's Matt. We're gonna get you to wrestling school. He's like 2 years old. You got him in a little leotard, like a singlet, and you got a little wrestling helmet on him. Put him in some boxing. It'll be great. All right, so, train your kids now.
So George goes on a 7-fight win streak from his debut, not just with the UFC, but his professional debut. He goes on to win 7 fights in a row. And then he goes to fight Matt Hughes for the vacant UFC welterweight championship. And he loses due to a submission. After that, I don't know what he did outside. I don't know where he went after that. I don't know what his mindset was.
The interesting thing about the Matt Hughes fight, we'll touch on it for a second, is Matt Hughes was the first person in MMA to really put, or at least in UFC, I should say, really put the submission game into wrestling. And that was a surprise armbar for, I think, anybody who watched it. No one really was like, oh, Matt's going to throw an armbar on him. But he did, which was amazing. And I don't think GSP thought he would do it either. So I think it was more of a tactical thing than anything in that fight.
Clerical error.
Yeah. So Matt gets this an armbar submission on him. And he's like, oh, damn, I lost this fight. It sucks, but I liked winning. I don't want to lose again.
Yeah, so... You don't see or hear from him for a few months, and he gets another fight outside of the UFC doing something else. But he comes back, and he fights Jason Miller, and he wins. And he fights Frank Trigg and wins, and Sean Shuriken wins, and BJ Penn, which was a...
Oh, you notice something about those names real quick? Those were big names, especially back then.
Yes.
Those are huge. Matt Hughes, that was the title holder. That's a pioneer of the sport.
Right.
Then Jason Mayhem Miller, which... That Savage was pretty crazy back then. He was a well-known guy.
Yeah, Jason Mayhem Miller was insane.
Frank Trigg, who had some great battles with Matt Hughes, right? A lot of people forget about that. Sean Shuriken, same thing. He put on one hell of a fight. Comes back, fights BJ, which is a legend in MMA. You can't deny that one.
BJ Penn. And that fight with him was really, really good.
Yeah.
I like that fight. I've watched that fight a few times.
It was pretty great. Then he gets the title shot with Matt Hughes again. Right? Comes back, and he knocks Matt Hughes out. He gets the TKO, right? I don't think it was an actual knockout.
It was a TKO.
It was a TKO. And then everyone's like, GSP's did it. He's going to be the champion forever.
Nobody will ever beat him.
Matt Serra shows up. I think it was a late notice fight, if I'm right. Yes. Or no, he won the Ultimate Fighter. And it was like, yeah, he won the Ultimate Fighter and they gave him the title shot. That's what it was. And he shows up and he's like, okay, I'm going to knock you out in the first round.
And then he goes
in,
out there
shocks the world.
and knocks out.
And it knocks
Or
out.
TKOs at least.
It-
GSP in the first round.
He hit.
Like,
It was a TKO in all fairness, right? But he hits him. No one thought that was going. I guarantee you, if there was people who made a bunch of fucking money that night betting on.
I don't even think GSP. I don't think GSP may have prepared as well as he thought he was going to have to for that.
Like Matt Serra, he's the ground guy. He's the jiu-jitsu guy that you're like, oh, that's like that. You're gonna go against jiu-jitsu guy. You want to wrestle this. I'm gonna get wrestled, and then I'm gonna get submitted or try to do that. He's gonna prepare for that. And Matt showed up with some hands that night. I don't know where he got them, but he showed up with some hands.
Hey man, it's like
And-
T-City and Frankie.
Yeah, same thing.
Same situation.
And Matt Serra knocks him out. He's I don't like losing, and he never lost again. But the amount of people afterwards that he fought, because he won the title almost immediately from Matt Hughes again, right? Well, you got Josh Koscheck after that.
Josh Koscheck. Then
and he wins it from,
he wins the interim from Hughes, then fights Sarah
and
to
then
get the belt,
he's the champ.
and then he defends 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times before he's like, you know, I'm gonna hang it up.
So look at the record afterwards: Josh Koscheck, Matt Hughes,
Killer,
Matt Serra,
killer.
John Finch, which he's still fighting, but that's also a pretty good fighter. BJ,
Killer.
Thiago Alves, Dan Hardy,
Underrated.
Josh Koscheck, Jake Shields,
Killer.
Carlos
Killer.
Condon, Nick Diaz,
Killer.
Johnny Hendricks, Michael Bisping. It's a pretty good record, man.
He's
Notable
fought
people.
every notable welterweight of that era. Literally. Every one of them. People that were known to just put people down and out.
These were all stars leading up to the GSP
and I
fight.
guarantee you, almost all those guys were on something.
Yeah,
Except
I mean,
for GSP that we know.
you look at it, you go, okay, Johnny Hendricks,
Obviously, we kind of know that one.
Michael Bisping, you could kind of argue maybe not.
I don't think
He
Michael
seems like a
Bisping
clean
was.
fighter.
Yeah, I don't think
he ever
Bisping
got
was.
popped.
Just because of the amount of the abuse that he took, he could have easily sidestepped that with drugs, but he didn't.
Nick Diaz, a lot of THC in his system. We
Yeah,
know
I mean,
that.
He probably didn't feel anything. Carlos maybe.
Condit, that's he seems like a clean guy. I haven't heard anything bad about him. I don't remember him getting popped. Jake Shields, a little iffy, but he does run with the Nick Diaz crew. Is probably some THC in the system. Josh Koscheck is a lying bitch.
Josh Koscheck is probably dirty and taking
First of
all
all,
kinds of stuff.
Josh Koscheck, I don't like him, obviously, but I don't like the way he fought. I don't like the fact that
He's dirty as
he would
hell.
poke people in the eyes and he'd be like faking, like, oh, I took a knee to the face or whatever. I don't like that. I never did. Even when he was on the Ultimate Fighter, whatever. But he's retired now, so whatever. Dan Hardy, I guarantee you that dude didn't take anything.
Yeah, Dan Hardy was I think Dan Hardy was a really clean fighter.
Thiago Alves, a little iffy. A little iffy there.
Isn't he Brazilian? He's on something.
Probably. BJ, I mean, that dude is he has the weirdest body shape. He's like in shape, but he's fat at the same time. But I doubt he had anything. John Fitch, I don't know him too well.
I don't know enough about him. Sarah, I don't think so, but
Matt Serra now, definitely.
oh yeah, Matt
Serra is on some testosterone. Have you seen him on the Dana White show?
He's huge.
Yeah, like the dude's in his 40s by now, and he's still
huge.
like built like a brick shit house. Matt Hughes, he's probably on it now because he got hit by a train and still lived.
Good lord, it took a train, man. It took a train to stop him.
So like the people he's fought, you can't deny. A lot of them are, pretty clean, except for Johnny, because even though he never got popped, or no, he did towards the end of his career.
So after he wins against Hendricks, he pretty much he just vacates the title. He takes a break. He knows that his body's damaged and he needs to get himself looked at and just heal up because he's taken a lot of abuse. And some of those guys were plowing through him. Like Johnny Hendrick especially was just beating the hell out of him, but he still won.
Carlos Condit, I think, had the best chance at it.
Yeah.
That really, went the distance, but he was pegging the hell out of him the whole time.
He takes a long break, and in
Almost
that,
4 years.
Yeah.
Almost 4 years to the day because it was in November, too.
after that, like in the intermittent time, he had told everybody, he's like, I'm not fighting again until they clean up the sport. And I think that was kind of the initiative for the UFC to go in, get USADA involved, and
I think it was
start
one
doing
of
what they
it.
want, because they lost their star, and they knew. And he told them why. He's like, dude, I'm taking a beating from people that are just destroying me because I know for a fact that they're on something. Yeah. And there's only so much I can do against somebody who's not feeling anything, who's not reacting like they would normally would if I was in a fight with them on the street.
Yeah.
Right? If they were clean. Not saying if you're going to be on the street fighting you're clean, but like there's no way that some of these guys would have put up as much of a fight, I know for a fact, if they weren't on something, which is fine. Like, he took all the years off. He felt a lot better. His fight with Bisping, he looked a little rough because, you know, it's 4 years off. He's in a whole different weight class, and he's battling colitis. I think it's colitis that he has, and he still looks good. He was able to finish, which was odd because he doesn't really ever finish.
His last like 6 fights were all by decision, which is the reason why everyone's like, oh, he's not a finisher, but he is. He goes for it, but he's there to win, is what it is. Like, you know, if your career was on the line, it's like, hey, you get a bigger payday if you win. Wouldn't you try to win opposed to like just wing one in there? You know.
Then we look at who he is outside the ring. He's an upstanding guy. He's always training. He's always pushing fighters around him to be better. He's always trying to push himself to be better. And even though he will finally retire, I mean, age catches everybody, he's still going to be training. I guarantee you he's still going to be training other people. He might even corner somebody here and there. I don't know. But he's going to be sought after for everything that he's learned. He
is the definition of a mixed martial artist.
Oh, yeah.
He's the guy, if you make a GOAT list of any, even in like combat sports, right? If you include boxing and kickboxing and all that, you'd put him on there, somewhere on that list. He is the definition of his sport. So you can't deny the fact that he'd be on that list. He is the guy that if you were to go, hey, let's go watch MMA, let's go watch UFC, since he hasn't been in the spotlight, but 4 years ago, if they're like, hey, let's go watch UFC, somebody would have been like, oh, is GSP fighting tonight? Because they knew him.
After GSP, who do you think of after GSP? There was nobody until Conor came along.
Prior to GSP, it was Chuck Liddell.
Yeah.
Because that was the big guy before him. But other than that, like a casual fan didn't really know.
Shout out to Chuck Liddell, though, for putting UFC on the map, being the Irishman.
He definitely did. He definitely brought that. Like, people were like, what the hell is...
His fights with Tito were just legendary. And they brought a lot of people to the sport. And then after that, it was literally GSP carried the entire sport by himself, getting it out there, getting it in the paper. I mean, like, God, it was Canada's best athlete for so long.
It was GSP, and then GSP kind of retired. Anderson Silva was kind of on his win streak, but he wasn't like the guy everyone wanted to talk to.
Well, Anderson Silva I'll say he carried the division. He carried the middleweight and maybe the light heavyweight because he carried the size with him, and a lot of people knew who he was. And without Anderson Silva, I don't think Brazil would have had as much of a push as they did at the time, because Brazil made a huge push whenever Silva got the title. And
like right when they got Pride in, and they got all those people that were fighting in Pride, they made a big push because those are the big names in MMA.
Yeah.
So Silva came over, Belfort came over, the Nogueira brothers came over, all these people came over, and they were like, oh, let's make a big push for these big stars, and it pushed Brazil to the forefront of a lot of divisions at the time.
And then you have, like, the big name after GSP leaves is Silva, but Silva's not really doing much, and then boom, Ronda and Conor show up.
Yeah.
And then UFC is a whole new level.
UFC acquires, like, right after, like, GSP left, and then they got Strikeforce, and they started doing the women's fights, the women's division, and they basically were like, hey, Ronda, sit on this rocket, and took off. And, they promoted the shit out of her. because she just kept winning, which was, it's amazing. There's a reason she's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, man, she is the reason women's MMA is where it's at. I love the other ladies she's fought with, Kat. I love Gina Carano. I love those ladies. They really helped start the women's division. But without Ronda, the women's division at all would not be there.
I was saying about this a couple days. The interesting thing about the women's division now, since Ronda's gone, Nunes is running things there. Cyborg's got her own division. The Bullet's about to take her division.
I'm pretty sure she is.
It's Rose is sitting pretty there, but I don't know how long she's going to have it. But as far as like women's MMA, it started out in bantamweight. That's the one everyone looks forward to, right? Because in my opinion, bantamweight's the one in the women's division, rather, that everyone's like, I want to pay attention to this one in those classes.
Yeah, it's like the lightweight division for the men.
And Amanda Nunes, they're trying to do the double champ thing with the women's division. They're putting Amanda Nunes against the featherweight Chris Cyborg, which I don't really like when they do that, the champ thing, which by the way is a dumb name.
I don't mind champion versus champion fights, but
I say if you're gonna do it, put it at catchweight.
Yeah,
that way you still have your champ afterwards.
Those fights are just insane to me, but they're such a big draw. Like, I don't particularly like Cyborg or Amanda Nunes. Like, they're not like the top women's fighters for me, but I'm definitely going to watch this fight because I know what Cyborg does and I know what Nunes does.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, which one of them is going to last longer?
I'm excited for the Cyborg Nunes fight because whoever wins, right, there's going to be a bantamweight title down the line, right? Somebody's going to have to do it. I don't know if Nunes is going to get it. I'm pretty sure Cyborg's got it in the bag, but I don't know. Nunes hits like a truck. We can get into it later. But I'm excited to see you brought up Kat Zingano. I think she has the ability to be the next champ in that division. I don't see why not. She's beat Nunes before. She can probably do it again. But that's something I'm kind of looking forward to. And I think she's still fighting, which is an interesting part of her career. She had that, bad couple years there.
Yeah, she had an injury too that she was out for.
She had an injury. Her husband passed away and a couple other things. But I think she's got the ability to transcend the sport because the way she talks, like in different interviews she has that ability. And I think she can be the next big thing and bring people in.
Yep, I completely agree.
I think that would be the next rising star in that division, or at least in women's MMA in general.
Right. Yeah. So
some of you are probably asking why we didn't put Fedor on the list or Ryan Bader. I know he's got his run to the title right now in Bellator,
and they're both great. They're both
great.
There's so many.
Dan Severn.
There's so many.
There's so many people we could put on this list as one of the GOATs. But there's never going to be one GOAT, unless you're like Muhammad Ali, where you claim you're the greatest and you go out and you show it and you transcend the sport to the point where even after you're dead, there's people going, oh, it's Muhammad Ali. Like, there's kids now, after he's dead, he's been dead for a little bit, and before then he wasn't in the spotlight. People go, oh, it's Muhammad Ali because he's the greatest, not just because of the movies, not because all the interviews he did, because he transcended the sport. Unless you have that sort of a thing, I don't think you can really be considered the greatest, right?
Right.
There's so many people we could put on this list, and we're probably going to do it again and again down the line of like the greatest whatever, the best pioneers, whatever. But we can't put them all in here. There's only so much we can record.
The level of the game is constantly changing, and for me, I'm trying to take into account the years I've been actively watching and not the years I've had to go back and research and look at, because there's a lot of old fights that are just so fun to watch, but I can't watch every fight that's ever happened. I can't. And it comes with baseball, it comes with football, no matter who your team is, when they're winning, when they're losing, and you can't sit there and say the Cowboys are the best team ever because they've been on they have 5 rings, but yeah, like how long has it been? I mean, I love Cowboys, don't get me wrong, that's my team, but I'm not gonna lie, right now they're not doing so great.
That's an understatement, man.
For the past 10, 15 years, they ain't been doing so good. They've had chances, but that's just with all all fighters. So to be considered the GOAT, you got to lose. Honestly, you got to lose.
Yeah.
At some point, you have to lose.
I think that has to be on your record, which is the reason why I didn't put Khabib in there at one point, because I think right now, pound for pound, he is the greatest. He's in the sport as far as record goes. And even outside of the sport where he's carrying himself, there was the issue in his last fight where he hopped out of the cage. But Dylan Dennis supposedly was talking shit, so I kind of feel him on why he did it.
Yeah, but that's very unsportsmanlike.
I don't agree with it. I don't. I can see why he did it. I don't agree with it.
Yeah, but then again, I can't really say much about it because he had a dolly thrown at him.
Yeah,
So-
you know, like this. I think Khabib that Khabib has the ability to be considered the greatest, right? But there has to be that loss because there has to be that comeback. You have to have that loss in your record because you have to fall so far down for me because everybody likes the comeback story, right?
It's not even the comeback story
Everybody
for me.
likes to see what you do after you lose. Whether you sit down and you go, well, I'm done because I lost, or you go, I'm not losing again, and you come back like GSP did, where he was like, I'm good. You know, I fulfilled everything I wanted to. Sport's not going my way right now. I'm going to leave. And he came back. Before that, he lost, and he came back and was like, I'm not losing again. I think Khabib has to find that guy that puts on a fight. Has to find that guy that's like, oh, I'm not just going to get wrestled and stay down. I'm going to get there. I'm going to throw. I'm going to see what you're actually like in this ring.
Ben Askren. Ben Askren.
Who is that?
Ben Askren. Ben Askren.
That cough sounds really weird, Ben.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm kind of sick. Ben Askren.
I think we're good with the list, right? Like, or at least our opinions on it.
Yeah. Khabib's not on the list for the simple fact that he hasn't lost, and he's arguably only lost one round against anybody ever. And Conor beat him in one round, I think, according to one of the judges. So it's the only one he's ever lost. So Khabib, on paper, best ever to do anything when it comes to mixed martial arts. But he's never had to reevaluate what he does.
I don't know, man. According to Chael Sonnen, he's never lost a round. He's lost fights. He's never lost a round. The American gangster himself has said that, so I haven't looked at all the cards.
Yeah, well, if we're going to go with that mentality, Artem Lobov is the GOAT.
Hey, there's a lot of people on
Russian
the
Hammer,
subreddit,
man.
the subreddit MMA, say he's the GOAT. You gotta say, like, the people's choice, Artem Lobov is the GOAT.
But that's going to round it out for us. So just to clarify, number 1, GSP. Number 2, DC and Bas Rutten, El Guapo, the handsome.
Yeah.
Number 3, Mighty Mouse, Demetrius Johnson.
And Dan Hendo Henderson.
With the H-bombs. Man, if you ever watch those things, you seriously need to look up these fighters.
Yeah, just make sure you type in, like, Dan Henderson H-bomb, because you just type in H-bomb, hydrogen bomb, show up.
Yeah, and
Like,
get some FBI stuff happening at your house after that.
Yeah, that's a little weird.
Trust me. It's going to round out for us. You've got our list. Tell us what you think, if you think at all.
I would hope our listeners at least think, right?
You know what? Sound off in the comments. Did you make it through the entire podcast?
Probably. Hopefully. Maybe not. Nah, I don't really care. It's our creation.
All right, guys. You can follow us on Twitter at HookedJP or at HookedJustin. Check us out there. We're kind of active. Jacob's more active than me.
I try. I got some likes, add some follows.
Coming up in the next month, we're going to have some, hopefully, in-house coverage of an event that's going on here. More to follow on that. And that's going to do it for us today, guys. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Hook J Podcast. Hope you enjoyed today's show. See you next episode.
Sometimes you've got to do what's right for you and not do what's right for everybody else.